Back here 2 years ago. My little girl was enrolled in the Baptist preschool, and I sort of wanted to get back into the community and found that her preschool was going to be closing. And there was an active group who were lobbying and trying to find another site, and that's sort of how I became involved in the project. I found that there was already an established committee who had already done a lot of the legwork. It had been known for quite some time that the Baptist preschool were announcing their closure. They'd given a lot of notice, and they had been frantically looking for somewhere else to go. The Baptist preschool didn't want to operate the preschool anymore. They didn't want to lease the premises. They wanted to utilise it for their church needs, and so we needed another facility. And really that is at the point at which I sort of came in, and the committee had rapidly exhausted that there weren't any existing facilities in the town, one that would meet the requirements and regulations, size-wise, outdoor space, that type of thing, that didn't need a huge amount of renovation. Yes. Because there were a few facilities, but they were, dilapidated and not fit for use, or they just weren't available. They weren't available 5 days a week, and this is The Baptist preschool is a long-running, 40-year, long-standing community preschool that's been fully enrolled, fully operational. All that time. The next resort then, and in consultation with the Department of Education and Communities, was to find a site that we could then progress and hopefully build on. And that's what we worked heavily with council looking at. We explored 6 to 8 potential sites in the community that could work, and eventually progressed down the route of community consultation on Crawford Park as a permanent site for the preschool. We were lucky enough to get Crawford Park recategorised, so Ballina Shire Council have set that aside specifically as a site for a community preschool, but we quickly came to realise that that wasn't going to meet the time frame for closure. And we were still left with a problem that our existing preschool was closing and we had nowhere to go. Capital grant funding was not available from Department of Education and Communities at the time, and we really were in a state of absolute desperation for a lot of, the end of last year and the beginning of this year.
I think at the start of this year, it'd be safe to say we really thought the preschool was going to close. There was times when we thought we can't do it. There's just going to be nothing we can move to.
From my perspective, I'm a primary teacher. I'm a special education teacher. I'm currently studying my graduate diploma in psychology. I'm very passionate about education. Now, having 2 young children, I see the benefits of early childhood education. It's something I firmly believe in, and I just couldn't believe that a town this size with a fully subscribed preschool would be left without a facility. And that's where we went from there. Crawford Park, that was a very thorough investigation process with council. We had to, forge good relationships with them, get a firm understanding of the difference between long daycare and preschools, and what would be of benefit to the community, looking at various different sites, making sure that there wouldn't be any problems with residents not wanting the preschool near their site, or sporting facilities that we're currently using those facilities. So there were quite a number of sites that we investigated that weren't plausible, and when it came to Crawford Park, it was then looking at going through a full community consultation process. So it was put out to the community. There were community meetings. People had a chance to write and say whether or not they agreed with the preschool being on that site. And that was quite a lengthy process that we had to go through. But in the end, it worked out in that it is a fantastic site for the preschool. It's very central to the community. It is going to be a real hub for the community. There were some submissions against the site, not particularly about having a community preschool within Alstonville, but more that particular site. There were some concerns about noise, concerns about
environmental. issues.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's part of a sporting facility or grounds. So the local soccer club currently use the site as part of their informal car parking. And so they were concerned about loss of car parking space. So there were a few hurdles to overcome. But realistically, council have sort of said, look, those are not insurmountable, and the need for a community preschool is greater. So as part of the DEC process for application, we had to do a detailed timeline of when we would like things to happen. So initially the DA would have to go in. That will, is that okay? That's right. That will take some time to go through, obviously, and we'll probably need to go through community consult again, which is just their processes. So we'd hope that would be through by sort of mid to late next year. And once the DA is through, we can then start expenditure of the site excavation grant money from community builders, and then from there on to building the building. But we'd hope to have everything finished by sort of September, November 2015 for the transition in 2016. In terms of the Amazing Place site, which sort of has come up for us very last minute, and we're incredibly lucky, really, having had our backs up against the wall now for 2.5 years with no site, to suddenly have this potential site come available. And it literally has come available because the landlords, the operators, have decided not to operate during term time, to only operate their tourist facility during the holidays. So it's great complementary use of a community facility. That looked easy, but initially when we investigated, we met with the proprietors. They said yes, we'd love to. We think it'd be great use for it as well. It could work really well, good complementary use. Went to council, and council said, sorry, you can't go there. It's actually in the wrong zoning. It's in a rural zone, which has recently been changed in the local environment plan, and it won't allow preschool on the site. So at that point, that was a no. We sort of, I think that was sort of March, April. Council had said no, you can't utilise the facility. The current preschool's only 100 yards up the road, but unfortunately, you can't go there. And it wasn't until there were a couple of sort of politicians, councillors, our local member, who sort of said, I think we can push at that a little bit more. And what we actually ended up doing was going through Minister Don Page's office, who's Minister for Local Government. We had to write to the Minister for Planning and Environment, Brad Hazzard, and request permission to basically occupy temporarily. So while they wouldn't allow it permanently on the site, would they allow us in the situation that we're in with no other facility but a permanent site potentially down the track, would they allow us in temporarily? They came back saying, yes, you can do it. You'll need to put in a development application, which was then $2,000, to put forward a development application, which then had to go through council and finally got approved. Yeah. 2 years. It says on the DA consent that we need to be out by the 18th of December 2015. So it is a set period of time. There is a possibility to request an extension on that, but it will, and we've been told directly, it will be very much on the premise that we are moving ahead with a permanent site. So it will only be, a relative time extension.
Of fundraising, creative fundraising.
Yes.
Yeah, really, there's a massive amount of it.
And we have, actively been fundraising over the last 3 years, but really sort of in the last 6 to 8 months, we've had a very dedicated fundraising committee who've had some great, creative, fantastic fundraising ideas. Movie night, we're about to do a calendar launch. This year we'll have raised $37,000 alone towards this project and the permanent site. The DA for the permanent site will be $20,000. there's a lot of cost involved, and all that money is coming from our local community.
But that's been the really exciting part about all of this, that especially this year the community are on board fully. Like, it's not just this little committee now battling to try and save the preschool and calling out for help at every angle. The community are just driving it now, really, aren't they? They're getting right behind. It is very exciting.
But it's going to be essential that in the longer term that there is, you know, other support, because a community can't raise $500,000 towards a build. No. You know, we can do our best and we can get a temporary option, which we've been lucky to get, but there is going to need to be additional support. Timing, really, I think. The fact that all of this for our community was happening in the transition between FACS and DOCS and the Department of Ed. So initially we were dealing with, you know, Department of Family and Communities.
Well, it started off as Community Services, yeah, then FACS.
And then DEC. So you're talking to people and getting some traction and some understanding as to the situation, and then suddenly they're not there anymore, or you're changing department, or and considering this has been going for 3 years, that was quite often the case. You know, we would speak to John Mason, who is the then General Manager of the Department of Ed, and then he would move on and you'd have to recount your story to somebody else. So that would be an ongoing sort of frustration. The fact that there was no capital funding program available at the time when, you know, we finally had land, we you know, had worked really hard to get that and still didn't have another facility, that there were no capital funds available to assist us in that project. Yeah, I guess there's no real clear pathway to, you know, what can a community do in this situation? And I'm sure it happens elsewhere. And the concern is then, you know, if there isn't a proactive volunteer community parent group to take this on, and it's a lot of hours and a lot of hard work, who does it? Or does it just not get done? We only recently joined CCSA, mainly from a, you know, because a budgetary perspective. We didn't have a lot of funds and expenditure, and we weren't really at the point where we, you know, needed that sort of level of support. It's really coming to the fore now that we're at the point of, you know, really needing advice on recruitment, awards, pay rates, conditions, contracts, all of that type of thing. So that's been really, really beneficial. Advice initially came about when we were looking at a transfer proposal with the existing provider, which was indicated could be a way that we could move forward with DEC, that we could look at, you know, a transition of the 2 preschools. And so that's when we first sought advice, and the CCSA have been great in terms of providing that level of support and advice.